Who killed Kuina? This is one of the most suspicious deaths in all of fictional piracy. You might think that, it was an accident. She fell down some stairs. Nah. There is very compelling evidence in the series to suggest that Kuina's death was anything but an accident. And there are a grand total of 6 explanations as well as 3 key suspects who have been flagged in the Kuina incident, or the Ku-incident for short. Before we narrow them down and reveal the truth though, I must say that this was not an easy investigation, which is probably why this has persisted as a question for the last quarter of a century. And a lot of that is to do with wildly inconsistent information regarding the event itself. It's been portrayed 3 times across 3 different mediums, and in each and every one, the manga, the anime, and now the live action, events play out very differently and each point to a different conclusion. If you've only seen 1 or even 2 of these, then you don't have the full story. So let's figure out the truth behind the Ku-incident. Starting with the manga, this is where we first meet one Shimotsuki Kuina, daughter spawn of Shimotsuki Koshiro, and thus a descendant of the legendary samurai Shimotsuki Ryuma. This is important because it explains why she's very good at sword things. So good that she defeated fellow villager Zoro 2,000 times and proceeds to call him, quote, pathetic for a boy, and continues to antagonize him by saying that losers should learn to suffer defeat in silence. Not very nice at all. So a young Zoro, he gets a little bit upset and challenges Kuina to a duel with real swords. Kuina says, it's your funeral, which is a very poor choice of possessive pronoun considering that the very next day it would go on to become her funeral. They fight and Zoro loses, but despite this, Kuina's tough exterior breaks down and she points out that she has breasts. The implication of that being that she will never become the world's greatest swordsman because she's a girl. But Zoro doesn't take too kindly to this kind of talk, saying that when he does finally beat Kuina, it will have nothing to do with breasts and instead everything to do with being the best. They then make a promise that one day one of them will become the world's greatest swordsman. And not 24 hours later, Kuina is found dead. Cause of death, stairs. And it's never elaborated on. We don't know how many stairs. We don't know how steep the stairs were. Perhaps even slippery. Stairs could be slippery. That makes them dangerous. All we know is that Kuina is no more. Highly suspicious, but I must say that things take a much more sinister turn in the anime. For one, Koshiro is painted as more of an antagonist in the anime version of these events. There's even an extra scene where he's having a discussion with some guy about how he can't allow Kuina to inherit the dojo as she is. And Koshiro even says straight to Kuina's face that she'll never become the world's greatest swordsman purely because she's a girl. And I actually think that the anime does Koshiro a bit dirty here, because in the manga he never mentions that Kuina being a girl is problematic. It's all very much painted as Kuina's own self-doubt. And I guess you could say it's implied that her beliefs stem from her father and her upbringing, but it's a big assumption. In the manga anyway. In the anime, it's 100% because of him. And it almost gives the impression that Koshiro is putting his hopes in Zoro surpassing Kuina and taking over the dojo, which is later reinforced by the fact that Koshiro gives Zoro the Wado Ichimonji. Interesting, because in the manga, Zoro had to ask for it. Speaking of Zoro though, the anime is much more descriptive in the events of the death itself, and it all points to a bit of tragic irony. Koshiro says, apparently she slipped and fell down the storehouse steps. Seems like she was looking for a sharpening stone for her beloved sword. And another dude replies, what would she need that for? And Koshiro says, I don't know. And then we cut to Zoro, who does know. Because this is actually quite sad, as it implies that Zoro may have played a part in Kuina's death. Kuina needed to resharpen the Wado because Zoro made her use it for their fight. Here's another big difference though. We do not see Kuina's body in the anime. Not the dead one anyway. We see the alive one, but not the dead one. Just a coffin instead. A decision probably made for censorship purposes, because showing a kid's corpse on Sunday morning probably isn't the greatest of ideas, although I do think that the episode of East Blue Special did show her body. But the spirit of Kuina also goes on to appear behind Zoro, watching him at one point, and the anime often takes a lot of creative license with the dead, like that Water 7 filler episode where the crew discovered the ghost of a Yagura bull. But the anime paints a much more visceral picture, and the live action events switch things up yet again. Here, adult Zoro gets stuck in a well, and he has to call upon the mighty powers of a flashback to get him out of it. And here we meet the most realistic looking Kuina so far, and also the most sympathetic, because after Zoro loses and throws a bit of a moss-headed tantrum, Kuina goes after him and even tries to help him with some sword-based advice. Zoro responds to this with rabba-dabba-da-da-da, general upset noises before declaring that, we're not friends. And then Zoro accuses Bamboo for providing him with his big fat L here today. So they do the thing that we've seen 3 times now, and it goes about as well as the first 2 did. Kuina wins again, and Kuina also ends up dying the very next day. But this time, the whole event is told by Koshiro in 8 words. Kuina has ellipsis. There was an accident, ellipsis. She's ellipsis. Gone, full stop probably. And Koshiro doesn't seem particularly affected by the death of his daughter, but that could just be that classic stoic samurai attitude. But what's interesting is that that in the live action, Kuina no longer even has a cause of death. It's just a vague accident. And I understand why they did this, because I don't think the general audiences would react well to the whole falling down the stairs line, because it does sound suspicious as crap. That's actually why this whole video exists. And in the West, falling down the stairs is also kind of code for domestic abuse. And even if it wasn't, it still sounds like a ridiculous cause of death for a fictional character. However, I would argue that not saying the cause of death at all also makes it pretty mighty suspicious. An accident? What sort of accident? Well, the accidental kind. I don't understand, Sensei. Can you elaborate? Nope. But shut up, Zoro! You go and re-practice your sword thing. It's mighty suspicious, but I will say that live-action Koshiro does have some sense when it comes to the Wado Ichimonji itself, because he says, the Wado Ichimonji is a rare blade. Why should I allow you to carry it? A wise hesitancy, considering that Zoro goes on to lose it in Shellstown, which leads Helmeppo to rub his man junk against it. And you know, in universe, do you think every time that Zoro puts that sword in his mouth, he remembers where the Wado has been? Maybe that's why he doesn't really use three-sword style all that much in the live action. But utilizing his drive to become the world's greatest swordsman, Zoro eventually defeats the Well and goes on to beat two people who are sort of dressed as cats. And it should be noted that live action Zoro has indeed learned from the coincident as he defeats Sham by pushing her down some stairs, which I think is almost certainly a Kuina reference. But what about Kuina herself? Because no matter which medium we look at, I just don't buy it. And there are 6 possible explanations for Kuina departing the battlefield of life, each stranger and more compelling than the last. The first is to take the explanation at face value. It's just an accident, and that's life. In the manga, it even makes a point of saying, humans are fragile things, which I guess goes towards the idea of seizing the day. You should chase your dreams now because you never know when your time's going to be up. Despite that idea, however, the mundane and meaningless cause of death has become quite a meme in the One Piece community, with Kuina's stairs even being personified as one of the most powerful characters in the entire series, named Down D Stairs. A sentiment which I think is best represented by this fan art of the how high will your ceiling go moment, featuring the 5 meme emperors of One Piece: Buggy the Clown, Gangsta Gastino, Foxy, Condoriano, and of course the legendary original meme emperor, Down D Stairs. And with the live action, a lot of people were also speculating on who or what was going to play the infamous Down D Stairs, with Chris Pratt being quite a popular choice. And Kuina's live action actress Audrey Simone has even come out with an official statement regarding the matter.
Do you want to form an alliance with me?
Absolutely, I do.
Good, good.
But what if I told you that there was a much more convincing explanation involving Down D Stairs, but as an accomplice rather than the culprit? Well, recently we've really hammered home in One Piece that swords have distinct personalities of their own, as well as agency to do things to some degree, at least the special ones. And this is something we've known for a while with the various curse swords, but Zoro's interaction with Enma showed that the blade was actively testing him and even capable of extracting his delicious, delicious haki. Now, Enma was crafted by Shimotsuki Kozuburo, who also made the Wado Ichimonji. So do you see where we might be going here? The Wado Ichimonji may have been testing Kuina, and she failed. So in a very one-ring act, it sabotaged her so that it could move on to the next candidate. It seems a bit brutal and weird for One Piece, but also that's exactly what Enma would have done. If Zoro failed its test, Enma would have killed Zoro and patiently waited for its next candidate. So the Wado could have forcibly drawn out Kuina's latent haki, and because she's not used to using it, this causes her to lose bodily control and faint. Like, oh no, and then stairs happen to be there, and Kuina falls either on the sword itself or in a conveniently death-inducing spot on said stairs. Wado then says to itself, "Good job, me," and then sits there waiting for Zoro. A compelling story, but the evidence against this would be that the Wado of all of the special swords is the one who has thus far shown no personality whatsoever. Before moving on, I should address the Toshigi in the room. I don't know why she's always in the room, but she is, and we're going to talk about her. So a lot of people are probably screaming at the screen throughout this video because they know that Toshigi is Kuina. And to be fair, a lot of that is because the author himself has very much led us down that road, what with Zoro saying that she looks exactly like Kuina, as well as Toshigi's obsession with swords. So the idea would be that the coincident caused some sort of amnesia, and for reasons, Koshiro decided that this would be a good opportunity to dump his daughter somewhere else, maybe as a way of giving her a fresh start to achieve her dream that she may or may not still have due to the amnesia, but to do so without the stigma that only men can be the best at swinging the sharp metals. What's interesting is that we know almost nothing about Toshigi's history except that she was born in East Blue and she likes swords. She really likes swords. Just like Kuina. And in the anime, Toshigi takes her Kuina cosplay so far that she even almost kills herself with a sword by falling down some stairs. Swords and stairs are just natural enemies, it seems. Plus, in the timeline, Toshigi is 23 years old post-time skip, which is painfully close to the age that Kuina would be today if she was still alive. There's legitimately only 1 year separating them, but they do have different birthdays. And Oda even put an end to the conspiracy theory that he himself started in the SBS of Volume 68, where he drew Toshigi as a child. And while still similar and did appear to train in a dojo, she is distinctly different from Kuina. I personally think that at one point Oda may have intended for Toshigi to be Kuina, or at the very least he wanted to leave that door open in case he decided, let's go through. But even if so, that idea has long since been abandoned. So let's get a bit darker. If you look into this topic on the internet, an explanation you'll commonly see on things like Reddit threads is that falling down the stairs is a metaphor in Japan. As in, it's a very polite way of saying that someone committed suicide. And if you ever see that, just disregard it. No one has ever been able to provide a shred of evidence that this is in fact a thing. However, the actual theory, minus the fake cultural relevance, isn't terrible though. The idea that Kuina, even after her conversation with Zoro, was still in such despair over her dream that she decided it wasn't worth living. It's a very dark interpretation though, and one that I don't think is consistent with the broader ideology of One Piece, and the anime presentation in particular is also very against this idea. In the anime, Kuina doesn't die immediately the next day. Time passes. We see both Zoro and Kuina train, so this Kuina certainly has not given up, and if anything is redoubling her efforts. But the anime does also give us something of an antagonist to work with. In the manga, anime, and live action actually, Koshiro is never depicted as particularly sad about his daughter's death, and it has been suggested that it was he who did the deed and blamed it on the stairs. The theory is that Koshiro did not want his daughter to become a swordsman. This is due to his upbringing as a Wano samurai with the classic attitude that samurai equals man. But little does Shimotsuki Village know that Wano has become a much more progressive place under the rule of Kaido. These days, not only can women become samurai, but so can trans women, dogmen, fishmen, giant baboons, and also whatever the hell Jizo is. I'm not actually sure, to be honest. He's sort of like a living statue man. But what I do know is that he is a samurai. The Koshiro theory is definitely most strongly supported, if you can call it that, by the anime, because this is where Koshiro actually has a motive. He states that he cannot let Kuina inherit the dojo in her current state, whatever that is, and he actively denies the pursuit of her dream. And should Kuina not obey his wishes, it might be his call to arrange an accident and to put the honor of his dojo onto the shoulders of another unsuspecting sword-obsessed child. I don't think this theory works as well in the manga, if at all, because Koshiro is barely shown. And when he is, he appears to be quite proud of Kuina. So in the manga, he has no motive. But I should also say that there is a chance that Kuina is still alive in a non-Toshigi way, because our final theory is that Kuina is still alive, and that her death was but a clever ruse to allow her, or should I say, to allow him, to go out and pursue his dream. In chapter 589, Will of the Winds, we see Dragon and his revolutionary army docking at Shimotsuki Village after having left the Goa Kingdom, and we also see both Zoro and Kuina training respectively. But Emporio Ivankov is aboard the ship, which puts him within striking distance of making all of Kuina's hopes and dreams come true. He quite literally has the power to give Kuina everything she's ever wanted, which boils down to a penis and the physical enhancements that seem to naturally spawn from it. Now, Emporio Ivankov is famous worldwide as a miracle worker. It's not beyond the scope of belief that even those in East Blue would have heard of his miracles. And when Dragon comes to Shimotsuki Village, Koshiro sees an opportunity for his daughter and asks Ivankov if he wouldn't mind doing him a bit of a favor. One problem with this idea, though, is that the timelines don't match up perfectly. Zoro famously fought Kuina under a full moon, and the Revolutionary Army docked during a half moon. So at the very least, this change could not have happened on this particular night. But given that Shimotsuki Village is friendly to the Revolutionary Army, this means that it may not be the only occasion that they stopped by. So it's possible, but the bigger question is, if this did happen, why would they then go to the trouble of faking Kuina's death? And in the manga, we pretty clearly see the body as well, so we'd have to believe that this was Kuina just pretending to be dead. And most importantly, what's Kuina been doing ever since? We have yet to meet or hear of any Kuina-shaped swordsman, so even in this best case scenario, the whole dream pursuit thing is probably going pretty badly. But I think the series is being a bit too hopeful. What I will say for the reality of the situation is that Kuina's life was a series of very cruel maneuvers. Being born with a body that she believed didn't support her dreams, then having the only person in the world who could magically change her body be in her village and Kuina never knowing, but then finally coming to terms with the idea that it didn't matter and that she could become the world's greatest swordsman, only to have all of her fears come to life and ultimately take her life with a mere set of stairs ending her existence the very next day. And as the anime implies, it may have happened as a direct result of Zora's fight and subsequent encouragement. It's pure tragedy. But you let me know in the comments, what do you think is the truth behind the coincidence?